Recording in progress.
Just call you to order. Good evening and welcome to this ordinary meeting of council. Welcome to councillors present and to members of the public, both in person and online. Before we begin, I'll call on Councillor Keane to give the acknowledgement of country.
Thank you. On behalf of all present and those watching on webcast, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of these lands in which we meet and pay our respects to the ancestors and spirits past and present.
Thank you. We've had nil requests for remote attendance or apologies or leave of absence. Are there any disclosures of interest for items on the agenda? Councillor Santa.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I declare a non-pecuniary and non-significant interest for 8.1 traffic committee.
If you turn off your light. This meeting is being recorded and made publicly available on Council's website. Those present should refrain from making any defamatory statements. By attending the meeting, you are giving consent to your image and voice being webcast. Councillors, council staff and members of the public must ensure that mobile phones are turned to silent during meetings of the council. Councillors who need to use their phone to text, talk or engage in social media activity must leave the chamber to do so. A person must not live stream or use an audio recorder, video camera, mobile phone or any other device to make a recording of the proceedings of a meeting of the council without the prior authorisation of the council. That brings us to confirmation of the minutes of the previous ordinary meeting held on the 9th of February. Is there a mover for the minutes? Moved by Councillor Santa, seconded by Councillor Beregi. Is there any discussion? I'll put the item. All those in favour? And that is carried. That brings us to the mayoral minute. As it deals with a item of personnel item, I propose to leave the mayoral minute to the end of the meeting in case we need to close the meeting for any discussion. That then brings us to the rest of the agenda. Is there a procedural motion? Councillor Beregi.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to propose the following items be moved on Globo. Item 8.1, the Traffic Committee minutes. Item 8.2, the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee minutes. 9.1.
Sorry, 8.2.
You wish to speak on 8.2? Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yep. 9.1, the Quarterly Budget Review to December 2025.
Yeah.
Could I perhaps suggest that if anyone now nominate which items they wish to speak to, and then we can have the procedural motion.
Speak on 8.2, 9.1. 9.1, 9.4. 9.5, 9.6. 9.8 as well.
Okay, Councillor Beregi, do you have
Thank
a
you,
procedural motion?
I have a procedural motion for the following items. 8.1, the Traffic Committee minutes. 9.2, Investment Loan Borrowings Report as at 31 January 2026. 9.3, Code of Conduct Statistics 2024-2025. 9.7, 287 Miller Street, Camaray. And 9.9, North Sydney Olympic Pool Redevelopment Project update.
Is there a seconder for the procedural motion? Seconded by Councillor Antonini. I'll put the procedural motion. All those in favour? And that is carried. So that brings us to item 8.2. Is there a mover for the item?
Happy to move it.
Moved by Councillor Beregi, seconded by Councillor Santa. Councillor Santa, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mayor. I note the comment by the ARIC Committee on the Council's essay of the application and its support for the application. ARIC said, and I quote, "The committee commented favourably on the content of the CEO's report. Coming as it did from a group of highly qualified and no doubt impeccable accountants and auditors, this is a ringing endorsement of our Council's financial management and practices. I hope the good members of IPART read this report and ARIC's conclusions. In particular, its registering of the fact that even with the adoption of option 3, our projected levels of reserve will be modest and importantly below those of comparable councils. This is an important point which unfortunately has not featured much in the public debate debate on the SRV issue, particularly since it should be remembered that council revenues generally in New South Wales are below the levels required for the services they are expected to deliver to their communities. The old saying 25% of services we deliver against 4% of overall government revenues. Given the increased demands on those services, which we can expect from the implementation of the state government's increased housing construction policies, our currently inadequate revenue situation needs systemic reform, or at least a higher revenue from rates. Again, with regard to the SRV application, I also note the point made by the CEO to the members of AREC that under option 3, a modest and necessary capital works program of $17 million over 10 years is planned. This is modest given the poor state of much of our infrastructure, which the community needs. If anyone doubts the validity of this statement, please visit the children's basement section of the Stanton Library during a rainstorm, if you can get in before it's blocked off through flooding. Or the former news agency on the corner of Ridge and Miller. The news agent who lived upstairs from the shop had to vacate the floor due to a leaking roof, followed by a forced closure of the shop due to underfloor flooding. As I've frequently said at previous council's meetings, this council's record on public consultation is second to none for government at all levels. But I also have to say that under our current system of representative democracy, there are times when elected representatives have to lead on policy decision-making, sometimes even when the community it serves may not wholeheartedly endorse a policy recommendation, particularly in a situation where the issues are complex and need lengthy investigation and consultation, which I have to say I applaud our staff for having organised and for the presentation they made to AREC. On this occasion, however, I've repeatedly seen in precinct meeting reports and in street-side encounters with residents, community support for the objectives of this SRV application and understanding of the reasons we are submitting it. To those opposing the SRV, I refer them to the statement made by Henry Ford when he introduced the Model T Ford and he was asked what the American community would think of it. His answer, quote, "If I'd asked the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses," unquote. Finally, I draw the council's attention in the report to the proposed invitation by the CEO to the New South Wales Auditor General to attend a future AREC meeting. I welcome this invitation. This positive report on our financial performance from these accountants and auditors in AREC is yet another example of the current council's sound financial management and its record in consultative practice and input from all quarters in our decision-making process. I applaud the CEO for making this initiative and I support the motion.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? I'll put the item. All those in favour and those against, and that is carried. That brings us to item 9.1, the quarterly budget review to December 2025. You moving the recommendation, Councillor Santo? Yes, seconded by Councillor Beregi. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I note with satisfaction that our operating deficit has decreased by $0.8 million to $5.6 million. This is, of course, still too high, but there is a downward trend. This is in the review. Due in part to a welcome development, a greater than $1 million increase over budgeted interest income, plus around $500,000 in additional operating grants received or agreed to be received. I do note, however, that cash and investments, while forecast to increase by just under $500,000, still don't meet our policy targets for liquidity. And I hope we will see further improvement in these funds in the next quarterly report, particularly an increase in income from user charges and fees and other income sources. I have a continuing concern that some of the favourable reduction in costs is due to the holding of vacant staff positions. The resulting pressures on current staff members are unsustainable and will have to be addressed, hopefully if we receive a positive outcome from the IPART submission. With regard to the community and its wishes, I particularly noted its expressed view that it does not want to see service reduction and that council should not deal with our financial situation by selling off our investment properties. Our infrastructure needs in particular should be addressed to take into account the new challenges presented to us by the state government's decisions on increased housing targets for the LGA. It is also my hope that this council can increase its revenue from non-rate sources as well as from rates. I believe that within our internal reserves, we can and should lift our revenue from potential income-producing projects, such as perhaps the quarantine depot buildings, and from including key locations such as Berry Island, Smoothie Park, Balls Head Point, and the coal loader, McMahon's Point, Kirribilli, and yes, the pool, in tourism product packages. Finally, I commend the staff for this comprehensive report, while noting with some concern the statement by the accounting officer that the underlying operational deficit and asset renewal backlog is, quote, continues to raise concerns regarding long-term financial sustainability, sorry, and notes that, quote, council has applied to IPART for sustainable funding to address persistent deficits in the asset renewal backlog. IPART, please note. I support the motion.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? I'll put the item. All those in favour? And those against? And that is carried. That brings us to item 9.4, motions for the Australian Local Government National General Assembly. Councillor Welsh.
I move the recommendation, plus I have an addition of another motion.
I think there are two, apart from your addition, there are
Yes.
two more additions. And we might just ask for them to be put up. Councillor Santa has sent in a proposed motion for ALGA, as have I. And so if are we able, it's up. So if you would take this on as the mover, and then we'll go to the detail in the debate about the detail of the proposed motions. So it's that your motion on the CSIRO, that your motion on hospital cardiac arrest be submitted to the NGA, that the motion from Councillor Santa entitled Federal Government Funding of Neighbourhood Power Schemes be submitted to the NGA, and that the motion from the Mayor entitled Protection of Commonwealth Lands be submitted to the NGA. Would you move that?
I do.
And seconded by Councillor Santa. And so if you wish to speak and introduce your second motion.
Okay, thank you. So I actually, can I speak about the CSIRO one?
You can speak about both of them.
Okay, sure. Okay. Australia is a coastal nation. The vast majority of our population, infrastructure, and economic activity sits on or near the shoreline, and that shoreline is changing. Erosion is accelerating. Storm surge is intensifying. Flooding and inundation events are becoming more frequent. Water quality pressures are growing, and these are not abstract climate projections. They are real costs carried by councils and real risks borne by our communities. Local government is on the front line of climate adaptation, but we cannot and should not do this alone. In November, the CSIRO announced up to 350 research positions would be cut, including in climate and adaptation science, oceans research, and water security. That means reduced modeling capacity, fewer scientists maintaining national data sets, less ability to partner with councils on practical solutions. The CSIRO provides something no individual council can replicate: nationally consistent science at scale. The probabilistic coastal inundation dataset, for example, provides future-focused inundation mapping for the entire Australian coastline. It underpins coastal hazard assessments and coastal management programs across the country. Without that consistency, we face fragmented approaches, duplicated costs, and increased legal and financial risk. And this is not just a metropolitan issue. For our regional councils, particularly those with long coastlines and small rate bases, access to CSIRO science is even more critical. Many regional communities do not have in-house coastal engineers, modelers, or climate scientists. You rely on national expertise to make sound planning decisions to protect agricultural land, fisheries, tourism economies, and local infrastructure. When funding to CSIRO is cut, regional councils feel it first and hardest. Coastal hazards do not stop at council boundaries. They do not distinguish between capital cities and country towns. They are national in scale and national in consequence. Reinstating and securing long-term funding for CSIRO is about ensuring every council, metropolitan, regional, and remote, has access to credible, independent national science. It is about protecting our communities. It is about reducing long-term costs. It is about making evidence-based decisions that stand up to scrutiny. And today we have an opportunity to speak with one voice as local government across Australia, and let's send a clear message to the Australian government. Strong national science capacity matters. Regional councils matter, and CSIRO must be properly funded to support us all. and I urge you to support this motion.
And if you would just, councillor, while you've got your 2 minutes left, speak to what your second motion is that you're proposing that we send to the NGA.
Okay. All right. Okay, out of hospital cardiac arrest is one of Australia's leading causes of death. Each year, more than 30,000 Australians suffer a cardiac arrest outside of a hospital setting. Survival rates remain low nationally, averaging around 10%. In Seattle, Washington, where training paramedics and community members in CPR was started, the survival rate is up to 77%. 75% of the Seattle community have CPR training and know how to use AEDs. Cardiac arrest can occur to anyone, anywhere, at any time. I was in the parking lot of the Primrose Park tennis courts and had to do CPR. As people walked by, they asked if they could help. I asked if they knew CPR. Every single person said no, and I could see they felt devastated. North Sydney Council is now collaborating with the Heart Foundation and is offering free CPR and AED training to our residents. It has been a terrific success, with the first 3 sessions booked out in no time. More dates in March are available, so you can sign up by going to the council's website and search for CPR training. I have a vision that North Sydney will match Seattle in survival rate statistics and community members that are trained. Ambulance response times can be slow. Councillor Holding and I were at the State Theatre when the woman sitting in front of us became completely unresponsive. Fortunately, when we placed her on the stairs to start CPR, I think the jolt of the move reset her heart rhythm, which can happen, and she woke up. We waited 2 hours for an ambulance before we made the decision to take her to Sydney Hospital ourselves. Local governments are uniquely placed to play a leadership role. Councils manage libraries, community centres, aquatic facilities, sporting facilities, civic buildings, etc. Many councils already install AEDs, including North Sydney, and run community education programs. However, coverage is inconsistent and often constrained by funding for purchase, maintenance, replacement, and training. A nationally coordinated and funded program would ensure, can I finish it? Just
Yep,
this
of
part,
course
this
you
part.
can.
A nationally coordinated and funded program would ensure equitable access to life-saving equipment and education across metropolitan, regional, and
Okay.
rural communities.
Thank you. Councillor Santa, do you wish to explain the motion that you're seeking that we send to ALGA?
Thank you, Mayor. You may recall that we submitted a motion, sorry, I used the royal we there, that I submitted a motion a while ago for us to support the establishment of neighbourhood power sharing schemes in our region for 2 reasons. We have a much higher proportion of medium-high density housing than most LGAs, and also that there's a high proportion of renters in those buildings. This means that we've been slow in adopting solar power in our area, mainly because of physically it has been up until recently not technically feasible to install solar power in large buildings with large numbers of people. The motion was passed in council, and also we've taken it to Local Government New South Wales annual general meeting, and also to the Assembly, the National Assembly of ALGA. On both occasions, similar motions to what we agreed to in council have been passed, but still we don't see these solar panels being installed. And it seems to me that the reason for that is the fact that there isn't government financial support for the establishment of these programs. They should be seen, in my view, as an essential component of the move to renewable energy. They can contribute greatly. They take pressure off the establishment of the grid, of grid-based power, and they ensure that a much larger proportion of Australian households enjoy the benefits of solar power. And so this motion is a new one, really based on not just support for, but the need to for federal government, and I think we'll do a similar thing for Local Government New South Wales, but for the federal and state governments to both contribute financially to the program and to incorporate them into the net zero policies which are being adopted by the governments in both states.
I'll speak briefly to the motion that I'm proposing that we send, that this National General Assembly calls on the Australian Government to return Commonwealth defence sites earmarked for sale to the people of Australia, to keep surplus public defence lands in public hands, and that the National General Assembly calls on the Australian Government to adopt the Sydney Harbour Trust model to protect Commonwealth lands, including former defence sites, and return them to the people of Australia. So this month, the federal government announced that it was seeking expressions of interest for the sale of 67 Department of Defence properties around the country, supposedly to net 1.8 billion in revenue after sale. That includes Victoria Barracks in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, as well as HMAS Penguin and Spectacle Island in New South Wales. We know that there's a housing crisis across the nation. State governments have moved to increase density to provide for housing, particularly through private supply in high density communities across the country, but equally in regional areas. What we know is that high density rely heavily on public open space and community facilities such as playing fields, libraries, community centres. And it's in this context that the public use of public land is vital to provide livable cities, whether in urban or regional Australia. And there is a model, and that model is the Sydney Harbour Trust that was actually established under the Howard government. And I'll have to say that the then member for the seat of North Sydney, now abolished, Joe Hockey, was very responsive to community activism in North Sydney to save HMAS Platypus. And that was in concert with similar community activities in Hunters Hill and in Mossman and elsewhere that resulted in the defence sites around Sydney Harbour being put into a trust. And in 2001, the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust Act commenced, and it includes a series of really important objectives, not least to protect, conserve and interpret the environmental and heritage values of that trust land and to maximise public access to the Harbour Trust land. There is a model already in place about the divestment of former defence land back into public hands for a variety of uses. And it may well be that if this Commonwealth government was to do so, that some of that could be for public housing, subject to the sort of master planning that the Harbour Trust did for each of its properties around Sydney Harbour. A quarter of a century later, after that trust was established, a different government is now seeking to divest those Defence Force public lands. It's vital that local governments stand with the affected communities for the principle of keeping public land in public hands for this and the next generation and the next. That's the motion that I propose that we put. Councillor Keane?
I have a declaration of interest. I hadn't seen this motion prior to this evening, so I couldn't declare it at the outset, and it's not significant. It's non-pecuniary, but it is significant, and I will stay in the chamber. Hence, I didn't leave when you started speaking. I agree with your motion, Mayor. I couldn't agree more, actually, and I know the trust very well, and it's a great model, and it works well for the defence sites. I agree with your CPR initiative and motion, Councillor Welsh. I couldn't agree. There's too many people going into cardiac arrest in our community, and to upskill our residents to be able to feel confident is a very good initiative, and I would like to support you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keane. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question. Can we vote individually on each of the motions, or are we going to vote as a block for those motions?
I can do them in seriatim. Is there a particular motion, perhaps if we did it by exclusion, is there a particular motion that you wish to vote against? We could have two motions then rather than four.
Well, I'm supporting motion number 2 and number 4, but not 1 and 3.
Okay, then what we might do is, Councillor, do you wish to have a right of reply? You don't need to. It's where these are about motions we're sending to the NGA, but if you wish to, you have that right.
I'll just make a quick comment. The CSIRO is such an important science institution that we have in this country, and the decrease in funding that it has experienced in the last sort of 4 months is devastating. And I would prefer that you would support this motion so that we can get that funding back up and it supports our community. Thank you.
Okay, then I'd like a procedural motion that we deal with each motion in seriatim. Councillor Beregi.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to propose that we split the motions into a motion for items 1 and 3, and then have a separate motion for items 2 and 4.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that procedural motion? Seconded by Councillor Holding. All those in favour? And that is carried. So what we will first consider is items 1 and 3. They are Councillor Welsh's motion that the National General Assembly call on the federal government to give certainty for long-term funding for the CSIRO. And the second is Councillor Santa to call on the federal government to fund neighbourhood power schemes. All those in favour? And those against? And that is carried. That takes us to the second part of the motion 2 and 4. That is Councillor Welsh's motion that the NGA call on the Australian government to fund and support local government to roll out CP and defibrillation training for residents. And the last is that the protection of Commonwealth Defence lands.
Excuse me, Mayor, I won't participate in the voting on the basis that I've declared the interest. I have to leave the chamber.
Okay. So I put that motion, all those in favour? And that is carried. And we will invite Councillor Keane to rejoin us. Thank you. So that brings us to item 9.5, the North Sydney DCP for the electrification of residential development. Councillor Santa, Councillor Hoy, wish to move it?
Yeah.
And seconded by Councillor Santa. Councillor Hoy.
Yes, I would like to move a motion which I have sent in. It is the recommendation with an additional point.
Okay.
So the additional point was that future amendments to the DCP be explored to expand the application of this policy to alterations and additions to residential development and non-residential.
Are you happy to take that on as a seconder, Councillor Santa? Yes. Okay. You have the floor.
The Net Zero Commission highlighted New South Wales's lack of progress on our climate targets and particularly identifies our failure to pursue electrification as a key failure. Their report finds that New South Wales is not on track to meet emission reduction targets, and the built environment sector is the worst performer, having nearly doubled greenhouse gas emissions between 2005 and 2022, while all other sectors had reduced theirs. It found that compared to other jurisdictions, the New South Wales government currently has neither regulations nor targets to drive building electrification. Unlike Victoria and the Australian Capital Territory, New South Wales has not placed restrictions on gas connections to new homes or development. Instead, the New South Wales government's current policy initiatives introduced in 2022 merely encourage but not mandate large new buildings to be all electric, along with some subsidies through programs like the Energy Savings Scheme. The New South Wales Labor government, in bed with property developers and fossil fuel barons, has repeatedly stated that banning gas is not a priority. As the rest of the world electrifies everything, New South Wales households stuck on gas will be locked into increasingly expensive energy bills, and more people will be forced into energy poverty. Low-income households and renters will inevitably bear the brunt if we do not stop building new gas connections and start helping households make the switch. In their submission to this proposed DCP amendment, Urban Task Force expressed a desire for electrification to be a state-based policy. I also wish that the state government were taking the lead on this important issue, but unfortunately climate leadership from state and federal governments is in short supply. It's important to consider where the gas is coming from. In New South Wales, we look to the Pilliga and the communities in that area. The Gomeroi people have been fighting the potential filthy gas exploitation project. They've been fighting the exploitation of the people in their community. Those who want to stay on gas want to open up that filthy reserve. That cannot be allowed to happen. We need to go further and faster and get off gas altogether. It's not just economic and environmental grounds that make the case for getting off gas, however. We know that phasing out gas connections and gas appliances is critical for meaningful climate action, but we also know that it's important to reduce what is now a really well-established health hazard. Some of the arguments being trotted out in defence of the gas industry these days feels like the kind of arguments in defence of the tobacco industry. We know that 12% of childhood asthma in Australia is now being caused by indoor air pollution, including from gas appliances. For children who grow up in households with gas appliances, it can be similar to living in a household with exposure to secondhand cigarette smoke. I think most people who are either moving into properties with gas kitchen appliances or who are choosing to purchase new gas appliances probably have no idea that is the case. There's a significant educational piece required. It should be the responsibility of the government to tell people the facts that we now know. Asthma Australia, the Lung Foundation Australia, and Doctors of the Environment Australia have all been really clear in calling not only for people to understand this, but also for meaningful initiatives to support people to transition to clean, healthy electric appliances in their home. There are also often arguments made around choice. People should have the choice to put gas in. My rent just recently went up. I'm looking for a new apartment. We've been looking around. I don't get to choose whether there is a gas hob or an electric hob there. I'm having to choose whichever one is available. There is no choice for renters. We are building tens of thousands of new apartments in this area, and we risk locking people into having more gas and danger to their health and their families' lives as a result of these decisions. It makes much more sense to be electric. So it's for this reason that I strongly support council taking this plan of action, which is very modest and sensible. My strong preference would be for us to go the whole way, straight away, and ban all gas connections, including for renovations. But I appreciate that is a more complex piece of policy undertaking and not one that we're quite yet prepared for. For that reason, I've proposed the additional point in this motion, in addition to that of the recommendation, that future amendments to the DCP be explored to expand the application of this policy to alterations and additions to residential development and non-residential development. This is included in the report already, that it is intended that council do so. I'm seeking to include it in the motion to make it clear that this is council's agreed intended future direction of travel. And if there isn't, I support the motion.
And Councillor Santa, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I applaud this motion as well. It complements the objective in the motion I proposed under an item 9.4. I note and support the recommendation from one of the respondents that council, quote, develop educational materials and transition support for developers and residents, such as clear guidelines on appliance selection, energy efficiency, and the health benefits of electrification, unquote. While there were a number of objections to the proposal, from my reading of them, I believe they were largely based on an incorrect reading of it, namely that it would apply to all properties, not just new builds. I think the replies by council staff adequately addressed their concerns. I also note the general support from energy providers and from, as we found in the public forum, from a highly distinguished person in the medical profession. My only adverse comment on the attached proposed DCP is that there is no mention of neighbourhood power sharing schemes. Sorry about that. And community batteries as a means of helping to overcome the lack of adoption of solar power generation in multi-residential and commercial buildings in our LGA. Notwithstanding this, I enthusiastically support the motion.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Welsh.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay, it is important to be clear about what this proposal does and what it does not do. The amendment applies only to new residential dwellings. It does not impact existing homes, and it does not apply to retail, hospitality, or other commercial premises. There is no additional regulatory burden being placed on our local cafes, restaurants, or small businesses. Importantly, the implementation is staged. That gives the development industry and the market time to adjust. It is a measured and responsible transition, not an abrupt change. Some have raised concerns about upfront cost. It is true that electrical appliances can currently carry higher initial price tags in some cases, but the evidence is clear. As technology improves, demand increases, and supply chains mature, prices fall. We have seen this with solar panels. We are seeing it with heat pumps, and we will continue to see it across electrification technologies. More importantly, numerous independent studies demonstrate that home electrification reduces overall household energy bills. Greater efficiency means ongoing costs for families that matter. For families, that matters. For renters and homeowners facing cost of living pressures, that matters a great deal. I can also speak from personal experience. My own home is fully electrified. Even without a battery installed, yet our energy bills have decreased significantly. Induction cooking is not only cleaner, it is faster, safer, and superior to gas. Our solar-powered heat pump has consistently provided reliable hot water, and electrification is better for household budgets. It is better for indoor air quality and public health, and is better for our environment. This amendment is forward-looking, responsible policy. It supports residents, protects local businesses from unnecessary impact, and positions our community for a cleaner, more affordable energy future. I support the recommendation.
Are there any other speakers? Before I go back to Councillor Hoy, I'll just speak very briefly. This has been a long time coming. I couldn't agree more with all three speakers, but it is shameful that New South Wales State Government hasn't sought to act and that local government is taking up the slack. Victoria and the ACT have long adopted this position. New South Wales is a laggard, and as we heard from the Doctors for the Environment, both here and before we put this on exhibition, there are compelling public health reasons to support this amendment. And as you've heard from a number of speakers, there are also excellent cost of living reasons to support this amendment. The fact is that Lane Cove Council, Waverley Council, the City of Sydney and Randwick, just to name a few, are already there before us. They've made these amendments to their DCP. The sky did not fall in. In fact, most developers are keen to have electrification in their new builds because they know that that's what the market wants. The City of Sydney is doing some excellent work on the next phase here, which is about commercial and hospitality premises, and hopefully we'll be able to piggyback on that work and follow suit when item 7 in the proposed motion becomes a reality. And so for all those reasons, I'm supporting the motion. Councillor Hoy, do you wish to have a right of reply? I'll put the motion. All those in favour and those against, and that is carried. That brings us to item 9.6, Council's submission on the draft new approach to strategic planning, discussion papers, the Sydney Plan and the statewide industrial lands policy. Is there a mover for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Berrigan, seconded by Councillor Santa. Councillor Berrigan, do you wish to speak?
I will speak briefly. Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to thank the council staff for an excellent report on what is a very underwhelming plan. It just seems to be a lot of words, a lot of high-level ideas with very little detail and any idea of how any of this is going to be achieved. I think the lack of guidance at the local level is absolutely tragic and will just result in worse outcomes going forward. How the plan can talk about growth and housing and not look at any funding and future infrastructure provision is unbelievable, but actually quite believable when you look at how this state government is approaching planning and housing. There is no long-term housing targets. This seems to be very short-term. Councils operate on a 10-year plan, and it's very hard to see how all of this will then will impact how we do our community strategic plan. The report is excellent, and it's very clear that the council staff have identified all of the issues and how it affects North Sydney. But I will just comment on one issue, which of course is open space in North Sydney. And it is quite ironic, really, that the plan identifies open space on their maps to include Cammeray Golf Course. And isn't it hilarious now that this state government is looking to privatise half the golf course and take it away? There's no understanding of how councils are meant to increase public open space when A, they're taking it all, and B, it's just too expensive to buy. The other comment that I have is that there seems to be an ongoing narrative that councils actually are responsible for the delivery of housing. Councils have no influence on the whole of how all councils can do is approve applications, and even then we are trumped by the advent of the Troika. And and the various other state significant development pathways, which leaves again very little room for councils to move. But the idea that councils can be held accountable for the delivery of housing is just one idea that the state government really need to move away from. And the state government leaving housing in the hands of private developers is clearly failing. And until the state government actually steps up and stops selling land, including land that has been purchased with public money in prime sites such as over Metro Station land, which can be developed for social and key worker housing, and take some responsibility for the housing crisis. This is just another plan for a plan for a plan.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy.
Yes, I just want to admire the professionalism of council staff who have presented a really intelligent response to these suites of so-called plans, because they're not really plans. It's at best a plan to make a plan. And in fact, the plan to make a plan is to have fewer plans. It's more a vibe. And that vibe is an arrogant one. That vibe is the state government says and local government jumps, seemingly oblivious to the irony that it has been consistently the state government that has and continues to act erratically in their planning decisions and not local government. Housing developments without water connections, suburb blocks built with only half a road, ad hoc housing approvals and spot rezonings that seem to be more guided by whether you've got the right lobbyists than any coherent strategy for the state. The grimaces of staff can be felt emanating throughout this report. Quote, one of my favourite sections. Concerns are raised that if the HDA and state government are considering ad hoc concurrent rezonings via state significant developments that are contrary to the policy positions established and adopted by state and local governments in their strategic plans, the proposed strategic planning framework, including the Sydney Plan and local strategic plans, will not be considered and will be further compromised as a result. Empowering local planning should include a presumption against proponent-led planning proposals and SSDs with concurrent rezonings, end quote. Really, all of these plans are plans for the state government to make utterly unscrutinised rezoning decisions in favour of big business and developer lobby mates. It's a highly concerning trend. This is also a masterful exercise in buck passing by a government that talks a big game about affordable housing, but is busying itself rolling out the red carpet to developers. I note the Sydney Plan commentary about social housing, which exemplifies their failure in leadership from successive state governments. Quote, demand for social and affordable housing continues to exceed the available supply. In 2025, more than 35,500 households are on the social housing waiting list in the Sydney region. Yet the amount of social housing as a proportion of the housing market has steadily declined over recent years. Increasing the supply of social and affordable housing in places where people want to live and where it is accessible to those who need it most will help people to live closer to where they work. The New South Wales government has introduced several reforms to increase the supply of social and affordable housing, including enabling state housing agencies to deliver projects more efficiently. It is also committed to build 8,400 new social housing homes, end quote. A waiting list of 35,500 households waiting for social housing and growing every day, and the state government's plan to address that is to build 8,400 new homes. What an appalling abrogation of responsibility. We're also told that housing and jobs need to be clustered around transport infrastructure hubs. That is good planning, but the government has no plans for new transport or infrastructure hubs. That's their half of the bargain, and they've entirely wiped their hands of the problem. There are so many issues with these plans, and the council staff have identified many of them very astutely in this report. I would just like to note at the end that one particularly absurd proposition I noticed was that apparently you can now live in one of 4 places in New South Wales. You can live in Sydney, Illawarra, the Hunter, or regional. 84 LGAs condensed into one plan. How offensive and preposterous to say that Byron Bay and Broken Hill should have the same plans or priorities assigned to them. That is the level of rigour that has been put into these plans. And I thank the council staff for doing an admirable job with a pretty rubbish situation.
Councillor Santa.
Thank you, Mayor. I too applaud staff for the preparation of this report. All 14 points in it are clear, succinct, and they highlight the glaring inconsistencies, incompleteness, and require practicality for such an important project. Important not just for North Sydney, but for the whole of New South Wales. I would comment on the very important point 12, that the proposal by the Minister for Sport and Lands to hand over control of Camray Park with possibly all of its multi-sport components, to Golf New South Wales renders the implementation of point 12 almost impossible. While I applaud the state government for embarking on this project, especially with regard to the objective of overcoming the currently complex planning system in New South Wales, I share the concerns expressed in the 14 points submitted by council staff. In particular, point 2, for the paper's lack of guidance on how to achieve its objectives, or indeed what the detailed outcomes and key strategies and performance indicators, KPIs, and even measurable targets are. Point 3, a lack of discussion on the development of necessary accompanying infrastructure. Point 4, a lack of guidance on liaison with councils and individual council targets. And point 12, with no guidance on public space for our public space deprived LGA. The following extract from the staff report needs to be repeated. Quote, council's ability to negotiate VPAs with applicants to deliver public benefits and supporting infrastructure is increasingly challenging, with fewer planning proposals being lodged as developers lodge concurrent rezonings through the HDA and SSD pathway. Substantial height and density are awarded, and the resulting profits are generally privatised. Unquote. This, more than anything else I have read in the staff report, sums up the current free gift to developers which the proposed system allows for. Another staff comment I'm particularly concerned about is the view that the replacement of older dwellings with new ones carrying fewer occupants to provide a more luxurious product to buyers. This undermines both the need to increase the number of properties for sale and create more affordable housing. The state government should adopt measures to prevent this. Overall, as the staff report notes, this paper recommends a top-down strategic approach to the planning system and disregards taking into account local differences and attributes. I'm particularly delighted to see in section 6, the staff recommending inclusion in the plan of a reference to the need to grow and manage the unique opportunity for North Sydney to establish business tourism. And I also endorse a recommendation in section 7 to introduce policies to grow public open space in our LGA, perhaps, as I've previously proposed in council, for the state government to compensate us for all the public land they have resumed for private transport and perhaps other private projects by building a rooftop park over the freeway to connect Camaray, Anzac and St Leonard's parks and reconnect this divided LGA for the benefit of our community. I support this motion.
Councillor Holding.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to speak briefly because councillors who've spoken already have summed up the summary of it very well. The thing that really came across, I would go as far as to say it's an excellent report. I really took a lot from it, and what is dripping from it is frustration. There's so much frustration around the wording of this. It's worded very politely, but there is frustration. And when we had our briefing on this, it was very clear that, as Councillor Hoy mentioned, a plan with no plan, or as he put it, even better, a vibe, is so hard to deal with. No targets, no specifics, and in fact, superseding work that was already done in 2018 with something different, something worse. So I really commend this report. I would commend everyone to read it. It has a lot of resonance for what our planning department are having to trawl through in every single, taking on account, as Councillor Berrigan mentioned, the HDA situation as well. So frustration is a big part of how I feel about it, and I feel this report encapsulates that, and I support the motion.
Oh, sorry.
Are there any other speakers? Just before I give Councillor Berrigan a right of reply, I'm going to speak briefly. I'll start with the positive, which has been enunciated and articulated fairly consistently from all of the speakers, which is the excellence of the report. And that's based in the strength that this council currently has of the most overworked and understaffed, but highly capable group of strategic planners, I think, outside of the City of Sydney. And we are very lucky to have that when we're dealing with changes to strategic planning and planning policy more generally on an almost weekly basis from this state government. And it's particularly important that we're able to be financially sustainable to bolster that resource for our community with the onslaught of state significant development applications that are wending their way through the Housing Delivery Authority at a rate of knots. The second positive thing is one identified in the report itself, which I think a statewide industrial lands policy is a good thing and long overdue. It's just a pity that it wasn't a statewide employment lands policy at the same time. This Sydney plan is the final death knell in the really good work that the Greater Sydney and later Cities Commission had been doing in concert with local governments and community across metropolitan Sydney. And that was resulted in the production of the District Plan North for us. That was a plan that had not only housing targets, but employment targets, jobs targets. It had an aspirational target over 10 years, and it had a base target. It gave certainty to councils, it gave certainty to communities, it gave certainty to the development sector. And certainly that's something that this doesn't do. The trashing of the North Sydney CBD in this plan is one of the big tragedies, I think. We now have employment and other targets because we've been rolled into the City of Sydney's the City of Sydney CBD for that purpose. And that leaves the North Sydney CBD with a great deal of uncertainty. And I know that that is not supported by by the majority of the commercial property owners in that CBD. The state government had invested more than $2 billion into the metro with a station in the North Sydney CBD in order to support it as part of the Eastern Economic Corridor. It contributes nearly $24 billion to the state economy, and yet it's left in limbo in this set of strategic planning documents. These documents are so high level that they're obviously just designed to provide cover for the state government to give flexibility so they can continue to deliver to a very small section of the development sector, to give them huge uplift for housing and private supply. And Councillor Hoy is right. The idea that social and affordable housing is put in here as a motherhood statement, and yet as a nation we have under 5% social and public housing anywhere, including in New South Wales, and all of the OECD equivalent countries have a minimum of 10%. And that's at the core of addressing our current housing and rental affordability crisis. And yet we have nothing but motherhood statements and no plan for delivery, no plan for funding, and we can repeat that when it comes to every other form of community infrastructure, whether it's public open space or the other community facilities such as recreation, libraries, community centres that will need to follow to support the population that is suggested here. It is a very, very disappointing document. I think the submission that the council staff have put forward is a good one, and I think we just have to keep lobbying this state government, particularly when it comes to their approach to the CBD and employment lands, because if we don't get any change, and once again they've kicked that can down the road because they were to give some further employment targets and certainty, and they were to release it last year. It's now this year. We need it, and we need to insist that they do it if we are to protect one of the bigger contributors to the state economy in the North Sydney CBD. For all those reasons, I support the motion. Do you wish to have a right of reply?
Thank you, Mayor. I will briefly. I think you said that the document had a vibe, Councillor Holding. I actually think it's vibeless. It's almost meaningless document. And actually, reading it is actually quite insulting as well. Insulting to those who work in local government in strategic planning, being told how to do their job, but not being provided with any measures whatsoever. And I think one of the crucial things, you can have plans as much as you like, but unless you have something you can measure, you have no idea how that plan is working. And one of the real measures for me, which I have called out all the time, is we have to look at when all the announcements and ribbon cuttings come for new housing, what is the actual net increase in housing? And most of the time it is a net loss. We are losing affordable and social housing for $1 million apartments. The other thing I'd just like to say is that it's a real shame that we seem to have both sides of politics on a unity ticket in this regard. Both seem to be chasing the developer, leaving it to the private sector. And who loses then? The community loses. And this is really a document which actually gives absolutely not only no certainty, but it puts up more questions than answers and leaves decisions to get made, relying on a plan which really has absolutely no substance to it whatsoever. And again, I'd like to thank the council staff for all the effort, as the Mayor said, under enormous pressure, under enormous staffing restraint, and to produce a plan of this, to provide a report of this substance under timeframes which are really quite unreasonable, is to be commended. So thank you.
I'll put the item. All those in favour? And those against? And that is carried. That brings us to item 9.8. Is there a mover for the recommendation? Moved by councillor Beregi, seconded by councillor Holding. Are there any you wish to speak to it? Are there any speakers? Councillor Carr?
Thank you. Given the item has confidential item on it, I move to close the meeting.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by councillor Keane. All those in favour? And that is carried. I'll just also ask that we have a second procedural motion, which is that we also close the meeting for the mayoral minute. Moved by councillor Holding, seconded by councillor Antonini. All those in favour? Thank you. We'll deal with both matters in closed session. Okay, councillor, have you stopped recording?
Recording in progress.
The meeting is now resumed in open session. In relation to item 9.8, second quarterly commercial property portfolio report, financial year 2025-26, it was resolved, 1, that the report be received, 2, that council resolved that the identified attachment to this report is to be treated as confidential in accordance with section 11.3 of the Local Government Act for the following reason: under section 10 capital A2 of the Local Government Act, D, commercial information of a confidential nature that would, if disclosed, to confer a commercial advantage on a competitor of the council. It is further noted that the release of this information would on balance be contrary to the public interest, as it would affect council's ability to obtain value for money services. The second item was mayoral minute 1. It was resolved in closed session that the recommendations in the confidential mayoral minute be adopted. That brings us to the close of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your participation.
Recording stopped.